We begin our slow observation in the ancient silence of Mesopotamia, specifically within the damp, fertile soil of the riverbanks, where the very first tools of accounting were born not of gold, but of common earth. It is a steady, grounding realization that before numbers were written, they were felt as cool, heavy clay in the palm of a hand. The ancient Sumerians, seeking to track the gradual accumulation of grain and livestock, would gather the wet mud from the river's edge, rolling it between their palms until it formed small geometric tokens. These simple shapes, cones, spheres, and discs, were not merely objects. They were the physical weight of a debt, the tangible presence of a transaction that could be held, counted, and stored in the cool darkness of a warehouse. As the clay dried in the warm sun, it hardened into a permanent record, a silent testament to the slow, methodical nature of early commerce that required no urgency, only the quiet persistence of the earth itself. Fact 2. Drifting deeper into the texture of these ancient transactions, we consider how these small, hardened tokens were kept safe from the elements and the prying eyes of others. To secure a contract, the Sumerian accountants developed the bulla, a hollow, spherical envelope also crafted from clay, into which the tokens were placed before being sealed shut. Imagine the sensation of holding this smooth, round vessel, knowing that the record of the harvest was rattling softly inside, hidden within the dark, airless hollow of the sphere. The exterior was smoothed over with a wet thumb, erasing any seams, creating a perfect, unbroken surface that concealed the truth within. This method ensured that the count remained undisturbed, resting in the cool shadows of the temple archives for years, or perhaps centuries, waiting for a dispute that might never come, existing in a state of suspended, silent potential. Fact 3. Over the gradual passage of centuries, the inefficiency of breaking the clay sphere to check the contents became apparent, leading to a gentle evolution in the surface of the record itself. Accountants began to press the tokens into the wet surface of the bulla before sealing them inside, leaving a negative impression, a shadow of the object on the exterior clay. This soft indentation was the ancestor of writing, the transition from the three-dimensional object to the two-dimensional mark. Visualizing this process, one can see the stylus pressing into the yielding mud, the material resisting slightly before giving way to the pressure, creating a clean, concave shape that would catch the slanted light of the afternoon sun. It was a shift from holding the item to observing the symbol, a quiet abstraction that allowed the mind to rest on the surface rather than worrying about what lay hidden within the opaque depths of the sphere. Fact 4. As the clay tablets flattened into the familiar, heavy rectangles of the cuneiform era, the physical environment of the accountant became one of rhythmic, dust-filled stillness. The scribe didn't work in the chaotic marketplace, but in the cool, stone-walled quiet of the aduba, or tablet house, where the air smelled of wet earth and drying reeds. The stylus, cut from a reed grown in the marshes, possessed a triangular tip that, when pressed into the clay, created the wedge-shaped marks we know today. There is a hypnotic repetition in this motion, the hand lifting, the reed turning, the tip pressing, over and over, row after row. The scribe's breathing would align with this steady mechanical work, the only sound in the room being the soft tuck of the reed entering the clay, documenting bushels of barley with the same dispassionate, calming regularity as the rising and setting of the sun. Fact 5. Moving slowly westward and forward in time, the heavy, cool clay gives way to the fibrous, beige texture of Egyptian papyrus, changing the sensory experience of accounting from one of impression to one of inscription. The papyrus, harvested from the swaying green stalks of the Nile Delta, was sliced into thin strips, soaked in water, and pressed together until the fibers locked into a single, flexible sheet. Run your mind over the surface of this material. It is not perfectly smooth like modern paper, but has a grain, a slight roughness that catches the tip of the rush pen. The ink, a mixture of soot and gum, flowed onto this surface, drying from a glistening wet black to a matte, permanent shadow. The scrolls were long and continuous, requiring the accountant to unroll them slowly with one hand while rolling them up with the other, a cyclical motion that mirrors the endless cyclical seasons of the river's flood and recession. Fact 6. Following the trade winds across the Mediterranean, we arrive at the tactile simplicity of the Roman calculation tools, specifically the calculi, the smooth pebbles from which we derive the word calculate. Before the numbers were written in ink, they were manipulated as physical weights on a grooved board or abacus. The sound of the Roman counting house was a soft, rhythmic clicking of stone against stone or bronze against wood. The accountant's finger would slide a smooth, cold pebble along a polished groove, moving it from the column of ones to the column of tens. There is a deep satisfaction in this tactile arithmetic, the feeling of the stone sliding effortlessly into its place, the visual order of the beads lined up in their rows. It was a system of pure logic made physical, where errors could be corrected not by scratching out ink, but by simply sliding the stone back to its resting position, restoring the board to its original, silent equilibrium. Fact 7. As the Roman Empire slowly dissolved into the mist of history, the format of the account changed from the continuous scroll to the bound codex, the ancestor of the modern book. This structural shift introduced the sensation of weight and enclosure to the history of the ledger. The pages were no longer plant fiber, but parchment, animal skin that had been scraped, stretched, and smoothed until it was pale and velvety to the touch. The covers were often heavy wood wrapped in leather, fitted with brass clasps that snapped shut with a dull thud. To open the ledger was to pry apart these heavy covers, revealing the cream-colored pages protected inside. The accountant would turn the page not with a flick, but with a deliberate, whole-hand motion, the heavy parchment settling slowly, pushing a small draft of air as it fell flat, ready to receive the steady, vertical columns of the day's expenses. Fact 8. In the dim candlelight of Renaissance Venice, a methodical evolution occurred that would stabilize the world of finance forever, the codification of double-entry bookkeeping by Luca Pacioli. This was not a discovery of excitement, but of balance. For every debit entered on the left, a credit must be entered on the right, ensuring that the books always rested in a state of perfect mathematical equilibrium. Imagine the visual symmetry of the open ledger, the two pages mirroring each other like the two pans of a weighing scale coming to rest. The Venetian merchant did not seek profit in this moment, but clarity, the reassurance that nothing was missing, that the universe of his business was contained and accounted for. The scratching of the quill was the only sound, moving from the left page to the right, a pendulum of ink swinging slowly back and forth, weaving a net of certainty that held the anxiety of the chaotic world at bay. Fact 9. Let us linger on the specific sensory environment of the Venetian counting house, or scrittoio, where this double-entry work took place. The light in the room was usually low, filtered through thick glass or oiled paper, casting a warm amber glow over the slanted wooden desk. The air would be still, filled with the faint dry scent of dust motes dancing in the shafts of light and the metallic tang of iron gall ink. The accountant sat on a high wooden stool, his posture curved over the ledger, his world narrowed down to the tip of his pen and the ruling lines of the paper. There was no multitasking, no distraction, only the steady, solitary transcription of reality into numbers. The ledger itself was a massive object, bound in vellum that yellowed with age, its spine reinforced with cords, a heavy, silent anchor on the desk that absorbed the details of the wine trade, the spice trade, and the wool trade into its quiet paper depths. Fact 10. Drifting forward to the gray, diffuse light of the 19th century industrial office, the ledger grew from a single book into a library of specialized volumes, housed in rooms lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. The sensory palette here is one of uniformity and repetition. Rows of clerks with white sleeves, rows of identical desks, and rows of black-bound journals. The paper had changed from the unique texture of handmade parchment to the smooth, consistent finish of machine-milled sheets, cool and crisp under the hand. The ink was no longer mixed by hand, but poured from glass bottles, a standard, deep blue-black. The sound of this era was a collective murmur, the scratching of a dozen steel-nib pens, the turning of pages, the ticking of a wall clock marking the slow, inexorable passage of the afternoon. It was a bureaucracy of silence, where the vast complexity of the industrial world was tamed, categorized, and filed away into the dark, quiet rows of the archive. Fact 11. As the industrial age settled into a steady, metallic rhythm, the silence of the counting house was gently modified by the introduction of the mechanical adding machine, a device of heavy cast-iron permanence. These machines, often painted in a deep, glossy black enamel, sat upon the mahogany desks like small, dormant engines of logic. The keys were not the flat plastic squares of today, but tall, spring-loaded pillars with circular tops, often rimmed in nickel, that felt cool and smooth to the fingertip. To register a number, the clerk would press the key down, a long, deliberate travel that ended with a soft, mechanical thud, and then pull the side crank. The crank moved with a heavy, oiled resistance, engaging the internal gears with a satisfying, fluid motion that turned the internal wheels, advancing the numbers in the small glass window with a faint, rhythmic click that marked the slow accumulation of the day's sums. Fact 12. Drifting from the heavy iron of the calculator, we observed the introduction of the Hollerith punch card, which transformed the abstract concept of debt and credit into a grid of precise rectangular holes. These cards were stiff, manila-colored rectangles, their texture rough and fibrous, smelling faintly of paper dust and dry storage. The card was a landscape of potential, a field of numbered columns waiting to be punctured. When the operator engaged the pantograph, a small metal pin would push through the cardstock, removing a tiny rectangle of paper, the chad, which would flutter silently down into a collection bin. There is a soothing geometry to a stack of these punched cards. When held up to the window, the afternoon light would filter through the random patterns of holes, creating a constellation of data points, a star map of inventory and payroll held quietly between the thumb and forefinger. Fact 13. The accumulation of these paper records necessitated a new architecture of storage. The vertical steel filing cabinet, a monolith of organization that lined the walls of the mid-century office. These cabinets were painted in a utilitarian olive green or a neutral gray, their surfaces cool and unblemished, absorbing the ambient light of the room. The sensory experience of the file cabinet is defined by the smooth rolling friction of the drawer on its ball-bearing tracks. To open it is to pull steadily on the polished steel handle, feeling the heavy drawer slide forward with a low metallic hum, revealing the neatly packed rows of hanging folders. Inside, the air was still and smelled of aging paper. The tabs of the folders formed a perfect, staggered horizon of labels, a physical manifestation of order, where every invoice had a resting place, suspended in the dark, airless quiet of the drawer until it was needed. Fact 14. Within these folders lay the physical evidence of the transaction, often duplicated through the delicate, fragile medium of carbon paper. This thin, crinkling sheet coated on one side with a layer of waxy, dark blue or black pigment was the quiet ghost of the accounting world. The clerk would sandwich this dark tissue between two sheets of white paper, aligning the edges with meticulous care to ensure the transfer was perfect. As the pen or typewriter key pressed down on the top sheet, the pressure transferred the wax to the bottom sheet, creating a soft, blurry copy of the original. The sound of handling carbon paper is unique, a crisp, dry rustle that differs from standard paper, and handling it required a slow, gentle touch to avoid smudging the blue dust onto one's fingertips, leaving a faint, persistent stain of the day's labor. Fact 15. The narrative of accounting slowly transitions from the mechanical to the electronic, entering the climate-controlled stillness of the early mainframe computer rooms. These were not chaotic spaces, but sanctuaries of temperature and humidity control, where the air was always cool, filtered, and carried a sterile, anti-static scent. The computers themselves, massive banks of cabinets the size of wardrobes, did not whir loudly, but emitted a deep, constant drone, a white noise of cooling fans that masked all other sounds. The accountant, now a data processor, would walk across the raised floor tiles, which sounded hollow underfoot, tending to the machines. The visual landscape was one of blinking lights, amber, green, and red, pulsing slowly on the front panels in a non-rhythmic, hypnotic pattern, indicating that deep within the copper and silicon, the ledgers were being balanced in a realm beyond human sight. Fact 16. At the heart of these mainframe systems spun the magnetic tape reels, the new vessels for the ledger, replacing the clay and the paper with a long magnetic ribbon. These reels, often enclosed in clear plastic cases to protect them from dust, were mounted vertically on the tape drives. When the machine accessed the data, the reels would turn with a sudden, jerky movement, followed by a smooth, rapid spin. The tape itself was a glossy, dark brown polyester, looping down into vacuum columns that acted as buffers, allowing the tape to move without snapping. There is a mesmerizing quality to watching two reels spin in unison, one giving, one taking, winding the invisible financial history of a corporation from one spool to the other, a continuous, circular flow of memory occurring in the cool, fluorescent-lit isolation of the server room. Fact 17. As computing power shrank from the room-sized mainframe to the desktop, the accountant's focal point narrowed to the glowing calmness of the monochrome monitor. In the early days of digital spreadsheets, the screen was a deep, void-like black, illuminated only by the phosphorescent glow of green or amber characters. The refresh rate of these early cathode ray tubes was slow, giving the text a ghost-like quality. When the numbers changed, the old figures would fade slowly rather than disappearing instantly, leaving a momentary trail of light. The cursor, a small blinking block of light, pulsed with a steady heartbeat rhythm, on, off, waiting patiently for the next entry. This dark mode was restful to the eye, a private, luminous world where the only reality was the glowing grid of the spreadsheet, floating in the darkness of the screen like a digital constellation. Fact 18. Alongside the silent glow of the screen was the rhythmic production of the dot matrix printer, a machine that turned digital data back into physical paper. While often remembered as noisy in the context of a large carpeted office, the printer's sound was a consistent, muffled buzzing, that moved back and forth with hypnotic regularity. The paper fed into the printer was a continuous, fan-folded stream, connected by perforated edges, and guided by sprocketed holes on the sides. As the report printed, the paper would stack itself automatically in a zigzag pile on the floor or a tray, folding over and over with a soft paper-on-paper shuffle. The continuous form meant there was no beginning and no end, just a long, flowing river of data, striped with faint green or gray bars to guide the eye across the wide landscape page. Fact 19. With the advent of software like VisiCalc and later Lotus 123, the conceptual structure of accounting became the infinite grid, a vast virtual plane of cells identified by coordinates. The interface was sparse, gray lines on a white or gray background, extending, theoretically, forever in all directions. The accountant navigated this space not by turning a page, but by scrolling, a smooth, sliding motion that moved the window over the data. There is a profound stillness in an empty spreadsheet. The cells are blank, expectant vessels, uniform in size, waiting to be filled with values. The formulas connecting them are invisible threads of logic hidden beneath the surface. One change in cell A, one sends a silent ripple effect through the entire sheet, updating the totals in column Z instantly, a frictionless, silent cascade of mathematics that requires no erasure, no crossouts, and no physical movement. Fact 20. We arrive, finally, at the modern abstraction of the cloud, where the ledger no longer resides on a specific desk or even a specific hard drive, but floats in the dispersed ether of data centers. Imagine a server farm located in a remote, cool climate, perhaps underground or in a Nordic warehouse. The environment is one of absolute symmetry, long dark corridors lined with towering racks of servers, their small blue lights flickering in the darkness like bioluminescent deep-sea creatures. There are no humans here, only the deafening silence of 1,000 cooling fans spinning in unison, creating a wall of white noise that absorbs all thought. The data, the history of every transaction, every debt, every asset, rests here on solid-state drives that have no moving parts, existing as microscopic electric charges trapped in silicon gates, a state of accounting that is perfectly still, perfectly preserved, and completely removed from the touch of the human hand. Fact 21. Drifting away from the digital ether and returning to the tangible, we must consider the physical standard against which all early accounts were measured, the single grain of barley. Before the existence of standardized metal weights, the ancient accountant relied upon the biological uniformity of the harvest to establish value. Imagine the tactile sensation of a handful of barley grains, cool and smooth, sliding through the fingers like a dry, organic water. To create a standard weight, the accountant would select grains from the middle of the ear, where they were most uniform in size, and place them one by one onto the scale. It was a process of extreme patience, requiring a steady hand and a breathless quiet to ensure the delicate balance of the scale was not disturbed by a sudden draft. This was the grain, a unit of mass that connected the abstract world of finance directly to the slow seasonal rhythm of the agricultural earth. Fact 22. Alongside the grain, the medieval exchequer utilized a tool of profound simplicity and geological permanence, the touchstone. This was a small, smooth tablet of dark schist or jasper, matte black in color and cool to the touch, used to test the purity of gold used in accounting settlements. The assayer would take a gold coin and draw it slowly across the surface of the stone, leaving a faint metallic streak that caught the light against the darkness of the rock. By comparing the color of this streak, ranging from pale yellow to a deep, rich ochre, against a set of standard needles, the purity was determined. There is a quiet, visual focus required here, a narrowing of the world to a single line of gold on black stone, observing the subtle variations in hue that determine the true worth of a transaction without the need for melting or destruction. Fact 23. In the damp stone halls of medieval England, a unique method of recording debt emerged that relied not on ink, but on the fibrous texture of wood, the tally stick. These were usually fashioned from hazelwood, a tree known for its straight grain and flexibility. The accountant would take a polished hazel rod, perhaps the length of a forearm, and use a knife to carve notches into its surface. The sensation was one of resistance and release, the blade pressing into the bark, cutting across the grain, and lifting away a small chip of wood to reveal the pale, creamy interior. The width of the cut determined the value. A cut as wide as a palm represented 1,000 pounds, while a tiny score represented a penny. It was a tactile language of debt, where the financial obligation could be felt as a series of ridges and valleys running along the length of the stick. Fact 24. The genius of the tally stick lay in its physical separation, a process known as splitting the tally. Once the notches were carved and the debt recorded, the hazel rod was split down the middle, lengthwise, creating two distinct halves that mirrored each other perfectly. One half, the stock, was given to the creditor, while the other, the foil, was kept by the debtor. The sound of the wood splitting was a singular, dry crack, followed by the tearing of fibers. When the debt was to be settled, the two pieces were brought back together. If the grain of the wood and the notches aligned seamlessly, the account was verified. This system relied on the microscopic uniqueness of the wood grain, a natural encryption that could not be forged, requiring the accountant to fit the pieces together like a slow, three-dimensional puzzle of verification. Fact 25. For centuries, these wooden records accumulated in the storage vaults of the exchequer, creating a vast, silent forest of debt. We can imagine the sensory environment of this storage, a cool, dry room filled with the scent of aging wood and dust. The sticks were bundled together in leather pouches or tied with rough hemp twine, stacked in bins that reached the ceiling. The accountant's job involved navigating this wooden archive, running a hand over the bundles, feeling for the correct length and texture. It was a library, not of books, but of timber, where the financial history of the kingdom was preserved in the slow decay of hazelwood, waiting in the darkness for the day of reckoning or the slow decomposition of time. Fact 26. Transitioning from the wood to the written numeral, we observe the slow visual shift from Roman numerals to the Arabic system, a change that altered the cognitive landscape of the accountant. Roman numerals, IVX, were architectural, composed of straight lines and rigid angles that required the hand to lift and drop repeatedly. In contrast, the Arabic numerals introduced a flowing, cursive motion. The number 3 or 5 allowed the quill to remain on the paper, gliding in a continuous loop. This shift reduced the physical fatigue of the scribe, allowing for a more rhythmic, fluid entry of data. The visual appearance of the ledger changed from a series of fence-like posts to a rolling stream of curves, a softer, more dense accumulation of information that was easier for the eye to scan in the dim light of the counting house. Fact 27. Embedded within this new system was a concept of profound emptiness that revolutionized the ledger. The zero. Before the zero, a blank space in a column was ambiguous. Was it nothing, or was it a mistake? The zero, represented by a simple, closed circle, gave a physical form to the concept of nothingness. Drawing a zero is a meditative act. The pen starts at the top, curves down and around, and returns to the origin, enclosing a small space of empty paper. It acts as a silent sentinel, holding the place of the tens or hundreds, ensuring the columns remain straight and true. It is the anchor of the decimal system, a symbol that signifies the absence of value while simultaneously giving value to the numbers standing beside it, a quiet paradox resting on the page. Fact 28. To maintain the flow of these numerals, the pre-industrial accountant relied on the daily ritual of quill maintenance, a task of precise, small movements. The quill, typically a primary flight feather from a goose, required curing in hot sand to harden the barrel before it could be cut. The accountant would use a small, sharp penknife to slice the tip of the feather, shaping the nib with a series of deliberate angle cuts. The sound was a faint, crisp snip as the keratin was shaped. The final step was the slit, a tiny fissure cut up the center of the nib to allow the ink to flow. This was not a chore, but a moment of preparation, a centering activity where the tool was honed to a perfect point, ensuring that the ink would flow smoothly onto the page without blotting or scratching. Fact 29. Once the ink was wet upon the page, it required drying, a process managed not by time alone, but by the application of pounce. Pounce was a fine powder, often made from ground sandarac resin or cuttlefish bone, kept in a small shaker on the desk. The accountant would sprinkle this fine white dust over the fresh, glistening black ink. The visual effect is one of a gentle snowfall covering the landscape of numbers. The powder would absorb the excess moisture, turning the ink matte and stable. After a moment, the accountant would lift the ledger and tap it gently, the excess sand sliding off the page with a soft, shifting sound, leaving the numbers dry and permanent, fixed into the paper fibers for eternity. Fact 30. Finally, we considered the physical comfort of the accountant working under the harsh glare of early electric lights, the green eye shade. As incandescent bulbs replaced candlelight, the light became brighter and more fatiguing. The eye shade, often made of transparent green celluloid, was designed to filter this harshness. The accountant would wear this visor, creating a personal microclimate of visual softness. The green tint was chosen specifically because it was believed to be the most restful color for the human eye. Looking through the visor, the stark white pages of the ledger were bathed in a cool, mossy tone, reducing the contrast and allowing the accountant to stare at the columns of figures for hours without strain, enclosed in a shaded, verdant world of quiet focus. Fact 31. Drifting further into the tangible mechanics of trade, we encounter the serene precision of the coin scale, a delicate instrument essential to the merchant's desk in an era of debased currency. These scales were often housed in small, rectangular boxes made of polished fruitwood, lined with soft velvet that had been worn smooth by years of use. When the box was opened, a small brass balance beam would be assembled, fitting together with a faint metallic clink. The merchant would place a questionable coin on one pan and a standardized weight on the other. The movement of the scale was slow and hypnotic. The beam would tip, oscillate gently up and down like a leaf on water, and eventually settle into a perfect horizontal stillness. Watching this slow dampening of motion was a moment of quiet anticipation, a pause in the transaction, where the only reality was the physical equilibrium of gold against brass. Fact 32. To ensure the integrity of these coins, the edges were often milled, a process introduced to prevent the surreptitious clipping of precious metal. Run your mind along the rim of a silver shilling. It is not smooth, but ridged with tiny, parallel lines like the edge of a file. This texture, known as reading, was created by a machine that pressed the design into the hot metal as it was struck. For the accountant handling these coins, the sensation was distinct. The rough edge provided a grip, a tactile confirmation of value that could be felt even in the dark. It was a security feature felt by the thumb, a rough, serrated boundary that protected the wealth of the nation, ensuring that the circle of silver remained complete and uncompromised as it passed from hand to hand. Fact 33. In the quiet, dusty corners of the colonial trading post, the ledger was often accompanied by the day book, a rougher, more immediate record of commerce. While the ledger was formal and permanent, the day book was a chaotic stream of consciousness, capturing the raw intake of the day. Pages of these books were often made of cheaper, coarser paper that absorbed the ink quickly, creating a feathered edge to the letters. The accountant would write in the day book with a sense of immediacy, noting down the arrival of a ship or the sale of a barrel of molasses as it happened. The smell of these books was often a mixture of the trade itself, tobacco, spices, or tar, lingering in the fibers of the paper, preserving the olfactory memory of the warehouse within the binding of the book. Fact 34. As trade expanded across the oceans, the accounting of risk became paramount, giving rise to the calm, statistical world of marine insurance at Lloyd's of London. In the famous coffee house, the slip was the primary document, a small, narrow strip of paper detailing the ship, its cargo, and the voyage. The underwriter would read the slip, and if he chose to accept the risk, would write his name one after the other under the text, literally underwriting the venture. There is a quiet solidarity in this list of names, a vertical column of signatures in varying styles of script, each one representing a promise of security. The paper itself was often passed from table to table, accumulating the weight of these promises, a silent, traveling document that wove a safety net of capital around a ship that was currently drifting somewhere on the far side of the world. Fact 35. To manage the complex currency exchanges of international trade, the Renaissance banker relied on the cambist, a reference book of exchange rates and weights. These volumes were dense with tables, page after page of columns, listing the relative value of the Venetian ducat against the Florentine florin or the French livre. The type was small and dense, requiring the accountant to lean in close, tracing the rows with a finger. The experience of using a canvas was one of cross-referencing, moving the eye horizontally across the page to find the intersection of two currencies. It was a slow navigational task, steering through a sea of numbers to find the precise coordinate of value, bringing the chaotic variety of the world's money into a single, unified understanding. Fact 36. We must also consider the sensory experience of the wax seal, the final mark of authority on a completed contract. A stick of red sealing wax, composed of shellac and turpentine, would be held over a candle flame. The wax would begin to melt, transforming from a solid stick into a viscous, heavy liquid that dripped slowly onto the paper. The smell was sharp and resinous, a scent of pine and heat. While the puddle was still warm and soft, the accountant would press the cold metal matrix of the signet ring into the center. The wax would yield, rising up around the edges of the seal to form a raised rim. As it cooled, it would harden instantly, locking the paper fibers into the design, creating a glossy, three-dimensional emblem that was cool to the touch and brittle, ready to snap if tampered with. Fact 37. In the high-ceilinged banking halls of the Victorian era, the soundscape was dominated by the rhythmic stamping of documents. The rubber stamp, with its wooden handle and inked pad, introduced a percussive element to the office. The motion was a two-part cycle, a press onto the ink pad, squish, and a firm press onto the paper, thump. The ink pad was a small tin box containing a felt sponge saturated with purple or black ink. The smell of this ink was distinct, chemical, and solvent-heavy. The stamp left a uniform, official mark, paid or received, in a font that had no personality, only authority. The repetition of this action, the steady squish-thump, became a meditative drumbeat of bureaucracy, marking the successful completion of a transaction. Fact 38. Transitioning to the personal accounting of the household, we find the humble passbook, a small pocket-sized booklet held by the bank customer. These books often had covers made of textured card or faux leather, mimicking the grandeur of the bank's own ledgers. The customer would slide the small book across the counter to the teller, who would enter the deposit by hand or machine. The most significant sensory detail was the update. The teller would often stamp the date and initial the entry, handing the book back. There was a sense of physical weight to the savings. The numbers were written there in your hand, a portable record of thrift. The book would be carried in a breast pocket or a handbag, a quiet, private object that grew slowly with lines of ink, documenting the gradual accumulation of security. Fact 39. In the realm of retail, the mechanical cash register introduced a complex auditory and tactile experience to the accounting of sales. The keys of an early national cash register were round and glassy, requiring a deep, firm push. The internal mechanics were a maze of gears and springs. A toll. When the sale was registered, the machine would perform a complex choreography. The drawer would shoot open with a spring-loaded chink. A bell would ring, a sharp, clear note designed to alert the owner to a transaction, and a metal tab with the price would pop up in the window. This was accounting as performance, a loud mechanical declaration of commerce. The closing of the drawer required a firm shove, ending the transaction with a solid, latching click, resetting the machine for the next slow accumulation of coins. Fact 40. Finally, let us observe the tranquil geometry of the pneumatic tube system used in large department stores and offices to transport cash and receipts. These brass or clear plastic tubes formed a circulatory system within the walls of the building. The accountant would place the receipt and money into a cylindrical capsule, twisting the cap shut with a secure threaded seal. The capsule was then inserted into the breech of the tube. With a soft whoosh of suction, the cylinder would be whisked away by air pressure, traveling silently through the ceiling and walls to the central cashier's office. It was a system of invisible movement, where physical objects were transported by breath-like currents of air, arriving at their destination with a soft thud in a padded basket, a magical, silent transfer of responsibility. Fact 41. Deep within the archives of the mid-20th century firm, we encounter the ubiquitous architecture of long-term storage, the banker's box, constructed from double-walled corrugated fiberboard. This object possesses a specific, dry scent of recycled paper and adhesive. The assembly of the box was a slow, origami-like ritual of folding flaps and locking tab into slot, creating a rigid container without the need for tape or glue. The texture of the cardboard is matte and slightly abrasive to the fingertip, a friction that ensures a secure grip when lifting. These boxes were uniform in size, designed to hold legal-sized documents perfectly, and their white and blue exteriors formed a repetitive, calming pattern when stacked floor to ceiling. There is a sense of finality in placing a year's worth of ledgers into this dark cubic enclosure, fitting the lid snugly over the top and relegating the financial past to the silent, dust-free stasis of the storage room. Fact 42. Inside these stored files, one often finds the physical evidence of the auditor's presence, the red tick mark. This small, angular symbol was not merely a doodle, but a rigorous tool of verification applied by a specific instrument, the red pencil or ballpoint pen. The auditor would move down a column of black-typed figures, checking each one against a source document, and with a flick of the wrist, apply the red checkmark. The contrast of the red ink against the black data and the white paper is stark yet orderly, a visual language of confirmation. The motion is rhythmic. Look, check, tick, look, check, tick, a repetitive cycle that could continue for hours, creating a meditative state where the only reality is the correspondence between two numbers and the satisfaction of the mark that bridges them. Fact 43. Drifting to the desk of the data entry clerk, we observe the development of touch typing on the 10-key numeric pad, a skill of pure muscle memory. The layout of the keys, 7, 8, 9, on the top row, became a map ingrained in the nerves of the right hand. The accountant would not look at the keys, but only at the invoice being transcribed, their fingers dancing independently over the plastic squares. The sound of a skilled operator was a rapid, fluid taka-taka-taka, followed by the heavy thump of the enter or plus bar. It was a trance-like state of translation, where visual numbers on a page were transmuted into physical taps in the dark. The hand hovering over the 5 key, which often had a small raised bump, to orient the middle finger without the need for sight. Fact 44. As the carbon paper era faded, it was replaced by the clean chemical magic of NCR, no carbon required paper. This multi-part form relied on microscopic capsules of dye coated on the back of the top sheet and a reactive clay coating on the front of the bottom sheet. When the pen pressed down, the pressure broke the capsules, releasing the dye to mix with the clay, creating a copy instantly. The sensation of writing on NCR paper is distinct. It feels slightly cushioned or soft due to the multiple layers and air pockets. There is no loose carbon sheet to discard, only the clean, magical appearance of blue marks on the second and third yellow or pink sheets, a silent chemical reaction triggered solely by the weight of the accountant's hand. Fact 45. To manage the movement of heavy bound ledgers across the expansive floor of the open plan office, the ledger trolley became an essential silent vehicle. These carts, often made of tubular steel and wood, resembled the book trucks of a library. The wheels were usually large, rubber-tired casters that rolled with a hushed, smooth rotation over the low-pile industrial carpet. Loading the trolley was a game of balance, stacking the heavy volumes so that the cart remained stable. Pushing it between the rows of desks, the accountant felt the resistance of the weight, a heavy, rolling momentum that required a slow, steady pace. The arrival of the trolley at a desk signaled the delivery of work, a mobile archive, bringing the history of the company to the stationary worker. Fact 46. In the corner of the office stood the thermal fax machine, a device that introduced a new fleeting texture to the accounting world. The paper used in these early machines was not standard bond, but a slick, shiny roll coated with heat-sensitive chemicals. When a financial report was received, the machine would emit a high-pitched electronic handshake, followed by the slow, grinding extrusion of the paper. The printhead heated up, burning the image onto the paper, which would curl stubbornly into a tight tube as it fell into the tray. The paper felt slippery and thin, almost warm to the touch as it emerged. Over time, these documents would fade back into whiteness if left in the sun, a reminder of the temporary nature of urgent communication. Fact 47. Organizing the loose papers within the metal cabinets required the suspension system of the hanging folder. These folded green or manila pockets were suspended by metal rods with hooked ends that sat upon a rail. The movement of the files was lateral, a side-to-side sliding motion that produced a metallic zeep sound as the hooks glided over the smooth rail. To label the file, the accountant would insert a small strip of type paper into a clear plastic tab. This tab would be snapped onto the edge of the folder, a small, satisfying click that finalized the categorization. The tabs were often staggered, left, center, right, creating a visual cascade of alphabetical order that allowed the eye to drift effortlessly down the drawer. Fact 48. For documents that required binding but also removability, the heavy-duty ring binder was the standard vessel. These thick, vinyl-covered notebooks contained a powerful, spring-loaded mechanism. Opening the rings required two hands to pull the metal tabs apart, a motion that released the tension with a loud, sharp snap. The papers inside were punched with holes, often reinforced with small, white, adhesive donuts to prevent tearing. Turning the pages of a full binder was a clumsy, heavy process. The mass of paper would lift and flop over the rings, settling with a shuffle. The binder sat on the shelf like a brick, its spine labeling the fiscal year, a solid, monolithic block of retained information. Fact 49. Inevitably, the manual entry of thousands of figures led to errors, which were managed by the opaque, white fluid known as correction fluid. The small bottle contained a tiny brush attached to the cap. The accountant would unscrew the cap, and wiped the excess white liquid against the rim of the bottle, a careful gesture to avoid drips. Painting over the error required a steady hand dabbing the wet, chalky substance over the incorrect number. Then came the waiting. The fluid had to dry completely, turning from a wet gloss to a flat, matte white crust. The accountant would often blow gently on the page to hasten the process. Once dry, it formed a new blank surface, slightly raised above the paper, ready to receive the correct figure, hiding the mistake beneath a thin layer of chemical forgiveness. Fact 50. Finally, we observe the machine designed for the cessation of the record, the paper shredder. In the era of increased security, the sensitive documents were not merely thrown away, but fed into the teeth of this device. The sound of a shredder is a consistent, low-frequency grinding, a mechanical chewing. The accountant would feed the sheet into the slot, feeling the machine grab the paper with a sudden tug. The page would disappear, transformed instantly into a cascade of thin, crinkled ribbons falling into the bin below. There is a strange satisfaction in this destruction, watching the ordered rows of financial data be reduced to a legible volume, a fluff of paper that could never be reassembled, returning the carefully crafted order of the ledger back to entropy. Fact 51. We now turn our attention to one of the most melancholic and slow-moving concepts in the history of accounting: depreciation. This is the financial acknowledgement of entropy, the gradual, invisible wear that time inflicts upon physical objects. The accountant tracks this decay not by observing the rust on a machine or the fading paint on a delivery truck, but by calculating a steady mathematical decline in a ledger. Imagine a straight-line depreciation schedule for a heavy iron press. Every year, precisely 1/10 of its value evaporates from the books. It is a silent subtraction, a yearly ritual where the asset becomes lighter in value while remaining just as heavy in reality. The accountant sits in a quiet room, reducing the worth of the world outside, acknowledging that everything built by human hands is slowly returning to the state of raw material, recorded in the ledger as a calm, predictable loss. Fact 52. Alongside the decay of assets is the hypnotic repetition of the amortization schedule, a long vertical ladder of numbers that maps the slow death of a loan. This document is often printed on a single, long sheet of paper, listing hundreds of monthly payments that stretch years into the future. The accountant views this list not as a burden, but as a descending path of certainty. Each line represents a month of time: January, February, March. With every payment made, the principal balance, the core of the debt, shrinks by a calculated fraction. There is a soothing inevitability to an amortization table. It is a prophecy of solvency, a mathematical promise that if one simply continues the rhythmic motion of payment, the debt will eventually reach the perfect, silent state of zero. Fact 53. To align these financial rhythms with the calendar, the accountant relies on the concept of the fiscal year, an artificial construct of time that often ignores the seasons of the sun. While the natural world operates on the cycle of spring to winter, the accountant's year might begin on the 1st of July and end on the 30th of June. This disconnect creates a private, enclosed timeline within the office. When the rest of the world is celebrating the new year in January, the accountant is merely in the middle of the third quarter, working steadily through the winter darkness. The year end is not a time of champagne, but of closing the books, a period of quiet, intense focus where every transaction of the past 12 months is gathered, categorized, and sealed away, separating the past from the future with a final double underlined total. Fact 54. Let us drift into the cavernous silence of the warehouse for the ritual of the physical inventory count. Once a year, The theoretical numbers in the computer must be reconciled with the physical reality of the shelf. This process involves walking slowly down long concrete aisles, clipboard in hand, in a space often cooled to preserve the stock. The accountant counts 1 pallet, 2 pallets, 3 pallets. The soundscape is minimal, the hum of high bay lighting and the squeak of rubber soles on concrete. It is a meditative act of observation, verifying the existence of cardboard boxes stacked in the shadows. There is no urgency here, only the need for accuracy, moving methodically from bin A1 to bin A2, marking the sheet with a pencil, confirming that the material world is exactly where the ledger says it should be. Fact 55. For the accountant working with the long fan-folded reports of the dot matrix era, the essential tool was the transparent reading ruler. These reports were dense grids of small type, thousands of lines of data that could easily swim before the eyes. The ruler, often made of clear yellow or blue plastic, acted as a visual anchor. The accountant would place it over the page, the colored tint highlighting a single horizontal row of figures, while dimming the lines above and below. Sliding the ruler down 1 notch was a tactile admission of progress. The eyes would scan the highlighted line, absorb the data, and then slide. The ruler would move down, framing the next set of numbers. It was a mechanism for isolating the present moment from the overwhelming volume of the data. Fact 56. In the days before digital biometrics, the accounting of labor was managed through the mechanical time clock, a heavy, wall-mounted device of cast iron and clockwork. The employee would take a thick cardstock time card from a rack, a check-in, and insert it into the throat of the machine. The sensation was a resistance, a heavy spring pushing back, followed by a loud, decisive teach chunk as the stamp hit the card. This sound marked the precise boundary between personal time and company time. The card would emerge with a purple timestamp, messy and official. The accountant would later gather these cards, a stack of stiff paper smelling of ink and sweat, and translate the printed times into hours and minutes, converting the abstract flow of a human life into the rigid columns of the payroll ledger. Fact 57. The culmination of this payroll process was the stuffing of the pay envelope, a ritual of tactile distribution. Before direct deposit, wages were dispensed in cash. The accountant or paymaster would sit with a large tray of currency, stacks of bills, and rolls of coins. The envelope was small, manila or brown, often with a small window or a printed table on the flap detailing the deductions. The motion was repetitive. Count the bills. Snap, snap, snap. Count the coins. Clink, clink. Slide them into the envelope and seal the flap. The envelopes had a specific bulge to them, a density of value. They were placed in a tray, row upon row, waiting to be handed out, a physical transfer of weight from the employer to the employee. Fact 58. Drifting back to the desk, we examine the humble but essential engineering of the binder clip, invented to hold large sheaves of paper that a staple could not penetrate. The binder clip is a study in tension. It consists of a piece of folded black spring steel and 2 silver wire handles. To open it requires a surprising amount of force, squeezing the silver loops until the black jaws pry apart. When released onto a stack of documents, it bites down with a formidable grip, holding the papers in a tight, immovable block. The accountant would often flip the silver handles down, folding them flat against the paper, transforming the chaotic stack into a solid, brick-like object that could be stacked, stored, or thrown into a box without shifting a single page. Fact 59. To navigate the columns of a physical ledger without smudging the ink, the accountant often used a blotting sheet, but also a handrest or bridge. This was a simple wooden slab raised slightly on 2 blocks, or sometimes a piece of clean, heavy card. The accountant would rest their wrist on this bridge, hovering their hand above the wet ink of the previous entries. It allowed for the hand to glide across the page without touching the paper surface. This created a sensation of floating, the pen tip being the only point of contact. It was a technique of preservation, ensuring that the oil from the skin did not tarnish the paper, and the cuff of the shirt did not smear the meticulous records of the morning's work. Fact 60. Finally, we consider the sensory environment of the bank vault, the ultimate destination for the ledger's physical assets. Stepping into a vault is a somatic experience. The air is still, heavy, and smells faintly of metallic dust and oil. The door itself is a masterpiece of intimidation, a circular plug of steel, often 3 feet thick. To open it requires the manipulation of the combination dial, a smooth, cold wheel that spins with a silent, fluid precision. The accountant must listen for the internal tumblers falling into place. Click, click, click. When the bolts retract, they do so with a heavy, muffled thud. Moving the door requires leaning one's entire body weight into it, feeling the massive hinges rotate slowly. Inside, the silence is absolute, a vacuum of sound where money rests in the dark, protected by the sheer, crushing weight of the surrounding steel. Fact 61. As the ledger moved from paper to the digital realm, it required a vessel for transport, leading to the ubiquity of the 5.2 5-inch floppy disk. This object, despite its name, possessed a strange, flexible rigidity. It was a circle of magnetic mylar enclosed in a square, black plastic jacket that felt textured like heavy cardstock. Handling these disks required a delicate, pinch-like grip to avoid touching the exposed oval of the magnetic medium, which shimmered with a dark, purplish, oil-slick sheen. Inserting the disk into the drive was a tactile ritual, the slow slide into the slot, feeling the slight friction of the internal liners, followed by the decisive lowering of the drive lever. This lever locked the disk in place with a mechanical clunk, engaging the spindle motor. The sound that followed was a rhythmic, grinding whir, chuk, chuk, the sound of the redhead seeking track 0 in the magnetic darkness. Fact 62. Evolution hardened the medium into the 3.5-inch diskette, a smaller, more robust object that introduced a satisfying density to data storage. These squares were made of rigid, cool plastic, often in a standard beige or gray, fitting perfectly into the palm of a hand. The design featured a spring-loaded metal shutter that slid back to reveal the tape only when inside the machine. The sensory pleasure of the 3.5-inch disc lay in the insertion, a smooth glide followed by a crisp, spring-loaded click as the drive swallowed the disc completely. To eject it was to press a mechanical button, causing the disc to pop out with a sudden, energetic release. There was also the Write Protect tab, a tiny, sliding plastic square in the corner. Moving this tab up or down with a fingernail was a physical act of locking the data, preserving the spreadsheet in a state of unchangeable permanence. Fact 63. Alongside the digital screen, the accountant relied on the canary pad, a specific type of legal notepad defined by its soft yellow hue. The choice of yellow was not accidental. It was designed to reduce the glare of white paper under harsh office lighting, providing a low-contrast background that was gentle on the tired eye. The paper had a distinct, slightly rough texture that dragged pleasantly against a pencil point. The ruling was precise, horizontal blue lines spaced perfectly for handwriting, and a single, vertical red line creating a margin on the left. The binding at the top was a strip of glued fabric, often crumbling slightly with age. Tearing the sheet from a legal pad produced a unique sound, a zipper-like rape along the perforated edge, separating the rough draft of a calculation from the clean slate beneath. Fact 64. For quick handheld calculations, the solar-powered pocket calculator became a totem of the desktop, replacing the heavy adding machine. These devices were often encased in brushed aluminum or dark gray plastic, slim and cool to the touch. The keys were made of soft, tactile rubber that depressed silently, offering a mushy resistance that was strangely comforting. The defining feature was the small strip of solar cells at the top, a reddish-brown glass rectangle that absorbed the ambient fluorescent light to power the logic chips. If the accountant leaned too far forward, casting a shadow over the desk, the liquid crystal display, LCD, would fade slowly into nothingness, the numbers dissolving like mist. Leaning back restored the light, and the numbers, black, segmented ghosts floating on a gray background, would slowly reappear, holding the memory of the calculation in suspended silence. Fact 65. In 1979, the digital landscape of accounting was defined by VisiCalc, the software that introduced the concept of the cell to the world. A cell is a coordinate of logic, an intersection of a lettered column and a numbered row, A1, B2. Before this, calculations were linear. Now they were spatial. The visual interface was stark, a black background with blocky white or green text. The cursor was a solid, blinking rectangle that hopped from cell to cell. The limitations of the hardware meant that a large recalculation, changing one number that affected thousands of others, imposed a mandatory pause. The accountant would press enter and then wait, watching the recalculating indicator flash in the corner. It was a moment of forced stillness, waiting for the silicon to ripple through the logic, rebalancing the digital ledger while the human operator sat in the quiet hum of the computer fan. Fact 66. Following VisiCalc came Lotus 123, which introduced the famous /menu command structure. To access the menu, the accountant pressed the / key, causing a menu of options, worksheet, range, copy, move, to appear at the top of the screen. This created a rhythmic, keyboard-centric workflow where the mouse was unnecessary. Experienced users developed a muscle memory for these commands, their fingers tapping out sequences like WWEY, worksheet, erase, yes, with the speed of a pianist. The screen of a Lotus terminal often featured a sleep mode where the phosphorus would dim to prevent burn-in, leaving a faint, ghostly afterimage of the grid lines on the glass. The software's palette was typically limited to high contrast, cyan, white, and magenta, a cool neon aesthetic that glowed in the dim light of the late-night office. Fact 67. The continuous form paper used in dot matrix printers possessed a specific feature known as the micro-perf, a perforation so fine it was almost invisible. The accountant's task, after printing a long general ledger, was bursting and deleaving. Bursting involved separating the continuous sheet into individual pages. The accountant would grab the stack and pull sharply. The sound was a high-pitched, clean tear, distinct from ripping normal paper. Deleaving involved stripping away the perforated strips on the sides, the tractor feed holes. This created long, confetti-like ribbons of paper waste. The motion of stripping these edges, hold, zip, discard, was a repetitive, pruning action, cleaning the messy edges of the data until only the pure rectangular report remained, ready for binding. Fact 68. With the adoption of Microsoft Excel, the accountant gained the power of the pivot table, a tool that allowed for the digital folding of data. Imagine a flat sheet of fabric that can be folded instantly into different shapes. This is the sensory logic of a pivot table. The accountant drags a field name, region, or sales into a box, and the massive, flat list of thousands of transactions instantly collapses into a neat, summarized square. There is a sense of vacuum-sealed organization in this action. The chaotic noise of raw data is silenced, hidden behind the plus signs that indicate grouped categories. Clicking the small plus expands the detail. Clicking the minus collapses it again. It is a breathing motion for data, expanding and contracting the information density with a simple, quiet click of the mouse. Fact 69. To ensure the permanence of digital documents in a world of editable files, the PDF, portable document format, became the digital equivalent of drying the ink. Creating a PDF is a process of freezing the fluid layout of a spreadsheet into a static image that cannot be altered. The visual representation of a PDF on screen often includes a gray background outside the page borders, simulating a physical piece of paper sitting on a desk. The text is crisp, the layout rigid. When the accountant sends a PDF, there is a feeling of finality, similar to sealing an envelope. The document is no longer a living, changing thing. It is a fixed artifact of a specific moment in time, immune to the accidental keystrokes or formatting shifts of the recipient, preserving the truth of the accounts in a digital hamburger. Fact 70. Finally, we must acknowledge the physical environment that housed these digital transitions. The fabric-walled cubicle, introduced to provide privacy in open plans. The cubicle wall is covered in a coarse synthetic fabric, often in a mottled gray or oatmeal color, designed to absorb sound. Run your hand over this surface. It is rough, acoustically deadening, like a heavy felt. The walls are pinned with thumbtacks, holding up phone lists, calendars, and compliance notices. The sensation of the cubicle is one of muffled isolation. The sounds of the office, the typing, the phones, the printers are softened, reaching the accountant's ears as a distant oceanic roar. Sitting within these three padded walls, the visual horizon is blocked, directing the focus entirely inward towards the glowing rectangle of the monitor and the silent, infinite grid of the spreadsheet. Fact 71. Beneath the hand of the accountant in the pre-optical era rested the mechanical mouse, a device grounded by a heavy, rubber-coated steel ball. This sphere provided the sensory feedback of the cursor's movement, rolling against the desktop with a dull, rumbling vibration that traveled up the wrist. Over weeks of scrolling through ledgers, the internal rollers would accumulate a fine gray lint, a mixture of dust and friction that eventually impeded the smooth travel of the ball. The cleaning ritual was a moment of microscopic maintenance, twisting the plastic retention ring, releasing the heavy ball into the palm, and using a fingernail to gently scrape the hardened dust from the white plastic rollers. It was a task of restoration, returning the device to a state of frictionless potential, ensuring that the navigation across the digital spreadsheet remained fluid, silent, and unhindered by the physical debris of the office environment. Fact 72. Drifting to the bottom of the spreadsheet window, we encounter the organizational serenity of the Worksheet tab. In the early days of Excel, these were limited in number, but as workbooks grew complex, the row of small, file folder-shaped tabs expanded across the bottom of the screen. The accountant clicks on a tab, Q1 expenses, Q2 expenses, and the entire grid above shifts instantly to a new reality. There is a profound sense of containment in this system. A single file can hold a dozen distinct worlds of data, layered behind one another like sheets of paper in a drawer. The ability to color code these tabs, soft pastel red for liabilities, cool blue for assets, creates a visual taxonomy at the bottom of the screen, a small, colorful horizon that guides the user through the deep architecture of the financial year without ever leaving a single glowing window. Fact 73. In the realm of accounts payable, the three-way match represents a triangle of perfect logic that must be closed before payment is released. The accountant must align three distinct documents: the purchase order, the promise to buy, the receiving report, the confirmation of arrival, and the vendor invoice, the request for payment. It is a puzzle of verification where the accountant acts as the arbiter of truth. They lay the documents side by side, physically or on dual monitors, checking that the quantity of 50 units ordered matches the 50 units received. and the 50 units billed. When the numbers align across all three sources, it creates a moment of quiet satisfaction, a match that allows the process to resolve. If there is a discrepancy, the flow stops, suspended in a state of calm inquiry until the deviation is corrected, and the triangle is once again equilateral and complete. Fact 74. To facilitate the mailing of these checks and invoices, the office relied on the specific engineering of the windowed envelope. This object eliminated the redundancy of writing an address twice. The envelope features a rectangular patch of transparent, crinkly plastic or glassine paper positioned precisely in the lower left quadrant. The accountant's task was not writing, but folding. The letter inside had to be creased at the exact millimeter so that the address block on the paper aligned perfectly with the clear window. There is a specific geometry to this fold, often Z-fold or C-fold, that ensures the recipient's name floats centrally in the transparency. Sliding the paper in and seeing the address appear clearly through the plastic film is a confirmation of fit, a secure enclosure where the internal document serves as its own external label. Fact 75. For the auditor traveling to a client site, the laptop docking station served as the anchor of their temporary desk. This heavy, rectangular base sat permanently on the desk, wired into the monitor, the printer, and the network. The ritual of docking involved aligning the laptop's rear port with the station's pins and pressing down with a firm, two-handed push. The connection was signaled by a mechanical clunk and the whirring engagement of the cooling fans. It was a transformation of the machine from a portable, battery-reliant notebook into a grounded, powerful desktop computer. To undock required pressing a mechanical eject button, often accompanied by a waiting period while the software disengaged, followed by a physical release that allowed the accountant to lift the machine free, severing the connection to the stationary world. Fact 76. Deep within the logic of data transfer lies the comma-separated values file, or CSV. This is the most austere and durable format for accounting data, stripped of all formatting, formulas, and aesthetic decoration. When opened in a text editor, a CSV reveals the raw skeleton of the ledger: date, amount, vendor, followed by row after row of text separated only by simple commas. There is a purity to this format. It is readable by almost any machine from the last 40 years. It represents data in its most liquid form, capable of being poured from a mainframe into a spreadsheet, or from a bank website into a database. The CSV file has no colors, no bold text, no borders, only the quiet, unvarnished truth of the values themselves, delimited by the humble pause of the comma. Fact 77. Supporting the accountant's wrist during long sessions of data entry was the gel wrist rest, a soft, oblong cushion placed before the keyboard. Covered in a smooth, cool lycra fabric, the interior was filled with a dense, semi-solid blue or clear gel. Pressing a finger into the pad left a momentary depression that slowly recovered its shape, a slow-motion rebound that mimicked the viscosity of deep water. The purpose of the rest was to elevate the carpal tunnel, keeping the hands in a neutral, floating position above the keys. The sensation of the cool gel against the skin provided a subtle thermal contrast to the warmth of the working computer, a passive, yielding surface that absorbed the weight of the arms and allowed the fingers to hover effortlessly over the number pad. Fact 78. When physical documents required consolidation, the accountant employed the heavy-duty hole punch, a lever-operated machine of cast metal. Unlike the small handheld punches, this device sat heavily on the desk, featuring a long, ergonomic handle. The accountant would slide a thick stack of reports into the throat of the machine, aligning the paper guide to ensure centrality. The action required a slow, forceful depression of the lever, driving the hollow steel drills through 50 sheets of paper at once. The sound was a crunching shear, crrr chunk, followed by the squeak of the springs returning the handle. The result was 2 or 3 perfectly round tunnels through the document, and a hidden tray below filling with multicolored paper confetti, the displaced matter of the bureaucratic process. Fact 79. To automate the repetitive tasks of the month-end close, the advanced accountant utilized the macro, a recorded sequence of commands. Creating a macro is like teaching a ghost to use the keyboard. The accountant presses record, performs a series of formatting steps, bold the header, sum the column, freeze the panes, and then stops the recording. The next time this task is needed, a single keystroke summons the macro, and the screen flickers rapidly as the invisible script executes the steps in a blur of motion. It is a moment of stillness for the user, watching the computer operate itself, the cursor flying across the grid, faster than human thought, applying logic and order to the chaos of raw data, while the accountant simply watches, hands folded in the lap. Fact 80. Finally, we consider the ultimate destination for the paper that must be kept for 7 years, the off-site records storage facility. These are vast, climate-controlled warehouses located in the industrial quiet of the suburbs, filled with millions of identical cardboard boxes. The atmosphere in these aisles is one of cathedral-like silence and coolness. The boxes are stacked 30 feet high on steel racking, accessible only by a specialized lift. Each box has a barcode, a digital license plate that links it to a specific coordinate in the darkness. The accountant rarely visits this place. Instead, they send boxes away to be swallowed by the archive. It is a dormant library of commerce, where the ink on the invoices slowly dries and the paper yellows in the dark, preserving the memory of every transaction in a state of suspended animation, waiting out the statute of limitations in total silence. Fact 81. In the high-volume data entry environments of the late 1990s, the soundscape was dominated by the specific mechanical click of the IBM Model M keyboard. This device was built with a steel backplate and buckling spring switches, creating a heavy, tactile device that weighed nearly 5 pounds. Pressing a key was not a light tap, but a deliberate actuation that required a specific gram force of pressure. The point of actuation, where the electrical contact was made, was accompanied by a sharp, resonant clack and a physical snap felt in the fingertip. For the accountant, this feedback was a rhythmic confirmation of truth. The number had been entered, the debit had been recorded. The sound of a room full of accountants was a chaotic, percussive rain, a continuous storm of plastic striking steel that signaled the relentless, successful conversion of physical paper into digital memory. Fact 82. When large datasets are migrated from one system to another, the accountant encounters the hypnotic visual of the progress bar. This simple graphic element, a rectangular container filling slowly from left to right with a solid color, usually blue or green, is a representation of time spatialized. Watching a progress bar is a form of enforced meditation. The accountant cannot speed it up, nor can they work on anything else while the system resources are consumed. The movement is often nonlinear. The bar might race to 99% and then hang there, suspended in a state of calculation for minutes that feel like hours. It is a moment of digital stillness, where the only activity is the blinking of the hard drive light and the slow pixel by pixel advance of the colored bar towards the right-hand border of completion. Fact 83. Drifting into the analytical side of the profession, we encounter the quiet detective work known as variance analysis. This is the comparison of the budget, the idealized plan against the actuals, the messy reality. When the two numbers do not match, a variance is created, a mathematical ghost that must be explained. The accountant traces this discrepancy, not with excitement, but with a slow, methodical drilling down into the subledgers. It involves opening nested folders of transactions, looking for the single invoice or miscoded expense that caused the deviation. The sensation is one of untangling a knot, following the thread of logic backwards through the system until the error is found, the variance is explained, and the books return to a state of understood alignment. Fact 84, supporting the accountant through these long hours of analysis, is the mesh ergonomic chair, a piece of furniture designed for absolute suspension, unlike the padded leather chairs of the past. The mesh chair offers a surface that is breathable and taut, holding the body in a net of synthetic fibers. The adjustments are manifold. The lumbar support, a firm pad pressing into the lower back, the armrests, which slide up, down, and pivot inward to support the elbows during typing, and the recline tension, which allows the user to lean back with a weightless, floating sensation. The chair is designed to disappear, to remove the distraction of the body so that the mind can exist entirely within the screen. The sound of the office is often punctuated by the soft gas lift hiss of a chair being lowered, or the faint squeak of a caster rolling on the plastic floor mat. Fact 85. Embedded in the toolbar of every modern accounting software is a visual fossil, the save icon, represented universally by a 3.5-inch floppy disk. This icon persists as a symbol of security, long after the physical object has vanished from the earth. The accountant clicks this small blue square instinctively, a reflex action performed every few minutes. It is an act of preservation, a digital prayer against the possibility of a crash. The irony of clicking a picture of a magnetic disk to save data to a solid-state cloud drive is lost in the muscle memory of the action. It is a skeuomorph, a design element that retains the ornamental shape of a past tool, providing a comforting, familiar anchor in an ever-changing abstract interface. Fact 86. While the save icon protects the immediate work, the nightly backup protects the existence of the firm. In the server room, this process was often visible as the spinning of a linear tape-open LTO cartridge. These cartridges, similar to thick cassette tapes, contained half a mile of magnetic tape. The backup drive would hum with a distinct, high-pitched motor sound as it streamed terabytes of data onto the spool. The tape moves linearly, winding from one hub to the other, a physical spooling of the day's work. The accountant would often be responsible for rotating these tapes, taking Tuesday out and putting Wednesday in, handling the plastic cartridges with a sense of ritual responsibility, placing the physical backup into a fireproof safe, ensuring that even if the building burned, the ledger would survive. Fact 87. The expansion of the digital workspace led to the ubiquity of the dual monitor setup, creating a panoramic horizon of data. The accountant sits centered between two glowing rectangles, the neck turning slowly from left to right like a spectator at a slow-motion tennis match. The mouse cursor travels a vast distance, sliding off the edge of the left screen and reappearing instantly on the right. This extended desktop allows for the juxtaposition of truth, the source document, PDF invoice, on the left, and the recording of truth, ERP system, on the right. The gap between the monitors is a bezel-thin no man's land where the cursor cannot rest. This setup envelopes the user's peripheral vision, creating a cockpit of finance where the rest of the room is blocked out by walls of liquid crystal light. Fact 88. When the system is overwhelmed by a complex calculation, the cursor transforms into the waiting indicator, historically an hourglass, now often a spinning blue circle or a beach ball. This icon spins with a perfect, looping regularity, a visual mantra of processing. For the accountant, this is a pause in the workflow, a moment where the input is severed from the output. The keyboard becomes unresponsive. Clicking is futile. There is nothing to do but watch the spin and trust the algorithm. It is a technological enforcement of patience, a reminder that despite the speed of light, the digestion of massive financial data still requires a finite, observable amount of time to resolve. Fact 89. To maintain visual order within the infinite white space of the spreadsheet, the accountant relies on grid lines. These are the faint gray lines that define the boundaries of every cell, creating a visible structure for the data. By default, they are there, a subtle net holding the numbers in place. However, for a presentation or a final report, the accountant might toggle them off. The effect is immediate. The structure disappears, and the numbers float on a clean, white void. Toggling them back on is a return to safety, the re-emergence of the scaffold. The grid line is the visual essence of accounting, the separation of one thing from another, the definition of specific coordinates in the vastness of the sheet. Fact 90. Finally, we consider the hidden architecture of the spreadsheet, the hidden row or column. Often, to make a report readable, intermediate calculations are concealed. The accountant selects rows 10 through 20, right-clicks, and selects Hide. The rows vanish and the row numbers jump from 9 to 21. A small double line in the header is the only clue that something is missing. The data is still there, participating in the sums, affecting the bottom line, but it is invisible to the eye. Unhiding these rows is a process of revelation, expanding the sheet to reveal the secret workings, the messy formulas, and scratchpad notes that support the polished final number. It is a digital folding and unfolding of truth, allowing the accountant to present a simplified reality while retaining the complex evidence just beneath the surface. Fact 91. Deep within the sublayers of modern enterprise software lies the invisible safety net known as the audit trail. This is a silent, automated scribe that records not the financial transaction itself, but the metadata of the user's interaction with the system. Every time an accountant opens a journal entry, modifies a value, or even views a sensitive record, the system stamps the event with a user ID, a date, and a time, down to the second. Imagine a digital footprint left in wet cement that hardens instantly. It is a chronological list of keystrokes that can never be erased. Viewing the audit trail involves scrolling through thousands of lines of gray text. User J. Smith modified field 402 at 14:02:33. A monotonous, reassuring log of accountability that proves with absolute certainty that nothing in the digital ledger happens without a witness, even in an empty room. Fact 92. To standardize the language of business across the globe, the industry adopted XBRL, or Extensible Business Reporting Language. This system involves applying invisible tags to the numbers in a financial statement, much like labeling specimens in a museum. The accountant does not just type revenue, they map the number to a standardized machine-readable taxonomy code. This process is a quiet, background operation of connecting specific data points to a universal dictionary. The sensory experience is one of mapping and linking, dragging a taxonomy tag from a library list and dropping it onto a cell. It ensures that a dollar earned in Tokyo is understood by a server in New York, not just as a number, but as a specific, defined concept of value, allowing the global financial system to converse in a silent, synchronized language of code. Fact 93. The modern corporate accountant spends the majority of their life navigating the gray utilitarian landscape of the ERP system, enterprise resource planning. Whether it is SAP or Oracle, these interfaces are defined by their vastness and their austerity. The screens are often dense grids of entry fields identified by cryptic transaction codes like FB50 or ME21N. To navigate this world is to memorize a language of alphanumeric shortcuts. The accountant types a code into the top command bar, presses enter, and is instantly transported to a different module of the database. The system is a massive, interconnected nervous system where a purchase order created in a warehouse instantly creates a commitment in the general ledger, a silent ripple of logic traveling through the silicon veins of the organization. Fact 94. With the rise of remote work, the ledger is accessed through the secure tunnel of the Virtual Private Network, or VPN. The connection ritual involves a small padlock-shaped icon in the taskbar. The accountant enters a password and waits for the handshake, a digital negotiation between the home laptop and the office server. There is a specific waiting period, a few seconds of connecting where the data is being encrypted, wrapped in layers of digital security before crossing the public internet. Once connected, the remote desktop appears, a window into a computer sitting miles away in a dark office. It is a ghost machine responding to clicks and keystrokes from a distance, allowing the accountant to manipulate the books of the firm from the quiet isolation of a home study connected by an invisible, encrypted thread. Fact 95. Emerging slowly as a potential successor to the traditional ledger is the concept of the blockchain, or the distributed ledger. Here, the book is not held by one person, but shared simultaneously by everyone in the network. The sensory metaphor here is the block, a container of data that once filled, is sealed with a cryptographic hash, a complex mathematical puzzle that locks the contents forever. This block is then chained to the previous one, creating an unbreakable line of history. There is no eraser in a blockchain. There is no correction fluid. To fix an error, one must add a new block that reverses the mistake. It is an architecture of absolute permanence, a stone carving in digital form, where the past is preserved in a state of mathematical immutability, visible to all but alterable by none. Fact 96. Every quarter, the silence of the accounting cycle is punctuated by the ritual of the earnings call. This is an auditory event where the finalized numbers are read aloud to the market. The accountant often listens in, holding the phone receiver or wearing a headset. The call begins with the operator's voice, calm and detached, introducing the executives. Then comes the reading of the script, a monotonous, carefully vetted recitation of the financial results. Revenue increased by 2%. EBITDA remained flat. The voice is often devoid of emotion, a steady drone of facts delivered over a conference line that crackles faintly with the silence of hundreds of listening analysts. It is the oral tradition of finance, a quarterly sermon where the written numbers are briefly given a voice before returning to the silence of the archive. Fact 97. The culmination of the fiscal year is the production of the annual report, a physical artifact that transforms the dry tables of the ledger into a glossy, bound book. The sensory experience of a fresh annual report is distinct. The heavy, high-quality paper stock, the smell of offset printing ink, and the smooth, matte finish of the cover. Inside, the letter to shareholders is printed in a serif font, surrounded by generous white space. The back half of the book, however, is the 10K, a dense forest of footnotes and black and white data tables, printed on thinner, tissue-like paper. The accountant leafs through these pages not to read, but to verify, checking the pagination and the alignment of the columns, holding the weight of the year's labor in their hands as a single, cohesive object. Fact 98. Underpinning all these records is the philosophical assumption known as the going concern. This is the quiet, confident belief that the entity will continue to operate indefinitely into the future. It is a suspension of disbelief, a refusal to acknowledge the end. Without this assumption, the values of assets would collapse to their liquidation prices. The accountant works with the calm assurance of eternity, depreciating a building over 40 years because they assume the company will still exist in 40 years to use it. It is a mindset of infinite horizons, a mental framework that looks past the turbulence of the present day and assumes a steady, unbroken line of commerce, stretching out towards a limitless future. Fact 99. As the career of the ledger closes, we return to the stillness of the empty office at night. The human activity has ceased, the phones are silent, and the lights have dimmed to the low-power emergency setting. The only sound is the hum of the HVAC system and the faint, rhythmic blinking of the server lights in the closet. The desks are clear, the papers filed away in the steel cabinets, the computers sleeping with their dark screens. The ledger, whether in a leather book or a silicon chip, rests in this quietude. The numbers are static, holding their positions in the columns, balanced and verified. It is a space of perfect order, where the chaos of the marketplace has been tamed, categorized, and brought to a standstill, waiting patiently for the sun to rise and the cycle to begin again. Fact 100. We end our journey with the fundamental truth, the equation that holds the entire universe of accounting in suspension. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. This is not merely a formula, it is a state of equilibrium. Imagine a classic two-pan scale coming to rest. On one side, everything the company owns. On the other, everything it owes to creditors and owners. They must be equal when the books are closed and the final penny is accounted for. The difference is zero. There is a profound, hypnotic peace in this balance. It means that nothing is missing, nothing is lost, and everything is in its right place. The tension resolves, the motion stops. The ledger is balanced, the world is steady, and as we drift away from the numbers, we are left with only the quiet, comforting certainty of the zero, perfect silence.